Once again, the bell tolls on the video game world, and it's time for us to conduct an autopsy on the industry that once primarily represented intellectual and creative entertainment, but now seems so hell-bent on greed and manipulation it insists on sticking its Hydra-like head so far up its own backside that its individual viper heads are each fighting to poke through one of its 7 head holes, like a Medusa crossed with an Aurorabus. So furiously trying to outdo itself with its own avarice, it can't appreciate that its conduct will likely result in its own demise. That's a long way of saying the video game industry behaves so disgracefully these days that external regulation is not only likely to happen, but it's already being planned and organised on an international level. However, it's not all bad news. It's mostly bad news, but not all. We will begin with some of the victors of this incredibly bizarre year in gaming and take a look at some of the best games of 2020. Admittedly, the phrase best games of 2020 makes about as much sense as holding a swimsuit competition in a monkey enclosure. But nevertheless, there were some surprisingly sexy monkeys in 2020. Metaphorically. And literally. Personal opinion trigger warning. I have opinions. They are my opinions. I made them myself. Sadly, not all of mine will coincide with yours. I guess that's why they are called my opinions, and not your opinions. See a theme developing here? I'm gonna like games you hate, and hate games you like. And that's okay. I do not expect anyone to agree with me. I am not trying to change anyone's minds. I am merely offering my personal and subjective opinions in these awards videos. My sole aim is to sprinkle my own very personal and stylised rainbow glitter of ideas and analysis on the intellectual and conceptual shit pie that is the video game discourse. It should theoretically be okay for us to have different opinions. If that sounds like it's going to be a problem for you, then I would respectfully advise you to go and seek out some confirmation bias instead. The internet's full of that shit, but the only thing you're going to find on this channel is my own unbiased and unfiltered opinions. I humbly request you respect that, because there is absolutely nothing to gain from applauding me for speaking my mind, right up until the moment I say that one thing you disagree with, and then you lose your shit. We are all going to disagree, and that is okay. On top of this, I didn't get around to playing all the hundreds of new games released in 2020, so keep in mind these awards are solely intended to be my experience of games last year. So without further ado, let's take a look at some of my best games of 2020, and for the record I just said it was the top 10 because it looks good in the title. I made that shit up, I've got no idea how many there are. Oh, and I have nothing to do with Epic Games Store exclusives because I boycott the Epic Games Store, because I will not support the People's Republic of China's hidden hand of influence over Western entertainment culture, nor any other regime involved in ethnic cleansing. So if a game was one of those, then it almost certainly slipped by me. So here are my top games of 2020. Death Stranding on PC. Look, I get it. A lot of people think this game is a fucking joke, and the joke is on the player. I know the heavy social media metrics in the game, whilst being well intended, played into the most annoying aspects of approval seeking and came pretty much at the beginning of the most woeful period of social media abuse, manipulation, censorship, fuckery and fake wokeness. At pretty much the time when people are playing video games to get away from social media, gig jobs and their bleak existence, Hideo Kojima makes a game where you deliver parcels for posh folk under dangerous conditions, whilst they hide safely underground, and pretty much your only payback is social media approval and materials you can use to help you deliver parcels more efficiently. I mean, this game ironically turned out to be a precise allegory for gig delivery workers in a pandemic. Who could have predicted it? Well, in 2020 it was released on PC, so the master race can suffer too. I could sit here for an hour criticising this game, but I already did that in my review. But what I didn't do adequately perhaps was make the following point. If the existential bleakness and strange systems in this game appeals to you, if you play this game and something clicks, you will be lost in this strange and beautiful world for many, many hundreds of hours. This game will not appeal to everyone, and I understand that perfectly. But damn, try at least to play it for a few hours for free if you can. Because if it turns out you are one of the people that finds appeal in this game, you could be missing out on a genuine experience. This game is utterly flawed in some respects, but it is probably unlike any other video game experience you will have encountered, and there could be a few special video game moments hiding here for you too. For me personally, this game took me on a strange journey. There were moments of genius, and on one occasion I did get a bit choked up. You might play this game and think, what the fuck is this cretin talking about? But you might play this game and discover something bleak, beautiful, with a slightly shitty plot. I'm just saying, try it for at least a few hours. It's a vastly better game than people give it credit for. Mountain Blade 2, Bannerlord. The early access slow burner of the year. It might not be finished, optimised, and in some cases working, with every patch introducing some kind of lucky dip of game-altering fuckery. Like breaking the economy or perks entirely not working. It might run like a clunky mess at times and not entirely be the most original game in the shop. You might even spend an in-game month saving up 13,500 fucking gold coins to buy a silversmith workshop to make yourself rich, only to discover that the last patch fucked up the workshop economy and you will earn so little back that it will take you half a fucking in-game year just to recoup your damn investment. I'm not bitter. Oh yeah, and why does every single other fucking army, group of bandits or caravans seem to be able to travel much faster than me? However many horses I buy. Mountain Blade Bannerlord has 1,000 ways to wind you up, but there is something strangely wonderful about this game. When you finally reach that moment of pure tactical perfection and line up your heavily armoured Vlandian sergeants, Palatine archers, and position your fearsome heavy cavalry on the hill ready to strike in the flank, as your adversary closes on your ranks, there is a beautiful moment of martial clarity as the 14 enemy looters get close enough to bounce a few rocks against the shields of your meat-grinding death brigade, and you can exact righteous and furious vengeance upon these helpless peons for no other reason than bloodbaths are funny. And you wanted to check out how your new sigil looks in the midday sun. Mountain Blade 2 Bannerlord is a game where you can obsess about crafting the perfect army and then go and test it out on some helpless peasants just because you can. The game is far from perfect, as yet unfinished, and has a myriad of flaws. But fuck, I've lost a few days in this game and obsessed about my armies and had some incredible battles. For all its faults, it is a fine game, much loved, with a great modding community and decent community all round. Mountain Blade 2 Bannerlord is the thinking person's Total War. If you like this kind of tactical and strategic game, there is a lot here for you to do. Ori and the Will of the Wisps. I love sperm. As much as the next person. God knows I should love it. I spend all day making it, unintentionally, and produce several million a day, some of which are alive. Sperm is something we all have in common. Let's face it, every single human that has ever lived at one point was literally composed of 50% sperm. Although I'm personally grateful that this is not a trait that persists into adulthood. Sperm is a great unifier that all of humanity shares in common, even if you were made in a lab like me. More than religion, philosophy or politics, Sperm is the single harmonising factor that binds us all together, like the glue of humanity. But even with my reverence of the stuff, I am frankly fucking perplexed that so many commentators are obsessed with a game where your sole function appears to be getting a sperm from this side of the screen to that side of the screen. Look, Ori is a solid effort. It's purty looking, a bit different, most likely reduces stress, and who isn't a fan of watching sperm flying across their screen? I'm just commenting that I don't really think it's Game of the Year material, and I didn't understand why it's made it onto so many top 10 lists. Then the penny dropped. It's just like the Video Game Awards. The big AAA publishers have the big fat AAA publicity and promotional checkbooks to slap people in the face with. That's why at the Video Game Awards, they always nominate every major player for something, just to avoid pissing off a major corporation. Even if Sony then just swoops in and buys all the winning categories. Allegedly. Ori and the Will o' the Wisps is getting so many mentions this year, not because it's a brilliant game, but because there were so few good games released in 2020 full stop. And Microsoft didn't have a particularly stellar year themselves. Battletoads? Gears Tactics? I guess Microsoft Flight Simulator was pretty good, but that's a real niche market. Ori isn't by any standards a bad game, it's just not Game of the Year material. Unless of course that year is 2020. Seriously, look into the eyes and listen hard to the words of some of the people talking about this game on their top 10 videos. Talk about overcompensating. Fuck, I even saw one reviewer waxing lyrical about Ori, but they got the fucking title wrong when they introduced it. I would postulate that if you don't even know what the fucking game is called, we should be perhaps sceptical that Ori indeed was the life-changing game experience that was described. Or if they even played the game themselves. All this sounds like I have a downer on this game, and I don't. The player feedback on Ori is excellent. Although I would note that despite the positive critical and player reception, a 25 quid base price tag is a lot of wedge for a sperm-based platformer that looks like the elf starting zone in World of Warcraft. It's a good game. But if AAA publishers hadn't screwed the fucking pooch this year, Ori would have gone the way of many other noble, worthy and crowd-pleasing niche games, and vanished into memory after a few weeks. So, whilst Ori certainly does not excel by normal video game award standards, it is nevertheless not one of the worst games published in 2020 at least. So yeah, congratulations, Ori. You win the venerable title of one of the least shit sperm-based games published in 2020. Not a particularly high standard to achieve, but credit where credit is due. Oh, and it is nevertheless, to its credit, a superior platformer than Doom Eternal. And the combat is better. Cloudpunk. Cloudpunk is Cyberpunk 2077's low-budget, voxel-based kid brother / poor cousin. I don't know how to describe it. It's a low-budget, low-cost cyberpunk game. And when I say cyberpunk, I mean that in the William Gibson sense, not in the CDPR nonsense. You play the part of a delivery driver in a dystopian future world. Okay, that's becoming a bit of a theme in video games these days. And what this game lacks in budget and scope, it makes up for in doing what it does well and with atmosphere. In fact, maybe this is a lesson the big developers should learn from this game, Ghost of Tsushima, and 2020 releases in general. A simple plan executed well is vastly superior to a complex plan executed badly. This is a simple game with a decent story, made on a small budget, which is winning awards and pleasing fans, mostly under the radar. I'm sure it's no coincidence that this game came out whilst everyone was waiting for Cyberpunk 2077. But, you know, I can't fault them for the hustle. This game is quite a curious mixture of voxel graphics and voiced characters, where you potle around in a city skyscape in your little pixelated delivery car. It is what it is, really. It's a low-budget indie game, where they did a good job of delivering as much game as they could for the low price. And the price today is 12 quid on Steam with a discount. It's not particularly heavy on gameplay and is more of a story/experience based deal where you fly around a rainy metropolis as per Fifth Element, self-described as a neon noir story game. They won't get any argument from me, especially since I have no fucking clue what neon noir means. Available on all platforms, Cloudpunk is a cheap time killer and a little gem. Hades. PC release on Steam. Do you like terror, uncertainty, and staring death in the face every day? Do you like prisoners being executed for the illegal black market organ business? Do you like internment camps, slave camps, and ethnic cleansing? Do you like totalitarianism, political prisoners being kidnapped and tortured for months on end, and Western democracy threatened by the corrupt influence of a foreign power? Well, neither the fuck do I, and it's precisely why I never played Hades, because these fucks bent the knee to Winnie the Pooh and went for an Epic Game Store exclusive. It is now irrefutable that the People's Republic of China is behaving even worse than the Nazis just before World War II. The PRC have already started their final solution with the ethnic Uyghur population, and this World War hasn't even begun yet. On top of this, Epic Games are using a giant bundle of Chinese cash to drive a wedge through the heart of gaming and create a console war on PC. So I have nothing to do with these data stealing shitlords. This is a real shame, to be honest, because I was looking forward to Hades. People I respect say it's brilliant. People I don't even like say it's brilliant. And by all standards, it sounds like a great game. It makes me sad that I couldn't review it at launch because it's an Epic Games exclusive, when so many people were eager to hear my opinion. Well, here is my opinion now. Supergiant Games should fuck off back to China with their cash and see what it's like trying to spend it in the most oppressive surveillance state on the planet. And God help you if any of you are African American, Muslim or Christian, because you will likely be singled out for special treatment. I'm getting fucking tired of the video game industry dancing like organ monkeys to the beat of China's drum, just so they can scrape some coins off the table of their domestic video game market. In the West, our Christmas video game sales are being renamed Winter Sales or Festivus, but meanwhile, nearly every AAA publisher is celebrating Chinese Lunar New Year front and centre and running special sales and in-game events like Call of Duty. I don't see them celebrating other religious or national events with the same effort. So technically, Chinese New Year is now the highest priority video game calendar event in the West, above even Christmas. Think about that for a second. Christmas got downgraded, but the Chinese Lunar New Year is now front and centre. When companies do business in domestic China, there are many terms and conditions. One is that their propaganda ministry gets access to and the ability to quietly leverage their management abroad. The Chinese staff report back anything that they feel misrepresents the motherland. This is not only ridiculous, but it's happening with full consent, because money is more important than ethics. Supergiant Games wins this booby prize. A couple of photos. This is a Chinese internment camp where Muslims are being forcibly re-educated. And this is a sign banning all black customers from a McDonald's restaurant in China, because the government tried to blame the Wuhan pandemic on black immigrant workers. Perhaps you can pop over to Xinjiang province and get some tourist snaps of the genocide. Just don't get mistaken for one of the locals and get thrown into one of the camps, boys and girls. There's no due process, and they ain't gonna let you call your lawyer from one of those camps. Enjoy spending your money. Deep Rock Galactic. I like midgets, and hobbits, gnomes, pygmies, and Nimmeraiga too. But I have always had a particular soft spot for dwarfs. Dwarves. The dwarfish. Deep Rock Galactic is a single-player or co-op speed mining combat first-person shooter where you play the part of one of the mythic bearded ones and explore procedurally generated caves full of alien baddies, where you use lasers, guns and high-tech gadgetry to fend off your attackers, grab the minerals and haul your asses out of there before the clock runs down on your extraction ship. I'd say baddies, but since technically the alien monsters live in their caves, and you are there stealing their ore and killing anything that tries to stop you, technically you're the bad guy. This could be described as an alien third world corporate mineral asset stripping simulator, where you play the part of a corporate dwarf mineral thief who shoots any of the locals who complain. It's basically like the Democratic Republic of Congo, set in space. But instead of transnational mining corporations, you play a dwarf. Only in this game, you probably end up killing less of the locals. Probably best not to think about it too hard. And maybe that's the golden quality of this strange and insanely original game. On paper, a speed-running mining first-person shooter where you are a dwarf makes no sense at all. But in reality, it turned out to be a thoroughly brilliant game. Loved by the players, strangely much appreciated by game developers, heavily supported by and for the community. Previously early access but now fully released in May 2020, Deep Rock Galactic is highly recommended and is the benchmark of early access video games. Unlike Cyberpunk 2077, which, let's face it, is technically still early access. Satisfactory. Didn't play it, but everyone tells me it's awesome. HalfLife Alyx. I suppose I should say something about this out of politeness. There's nothing like waiting for years for another Half-Life game, and then when it finally arrives, it's just a fucky VR title to help Valve shift units of VR headsets. I like Half-Life. I don't, however, like motion sickness, backfisting my PC monitor, vomiting in locations other than my own bed, and falling backwards over coffee tables. Sadly, I'm not rich enough to own a giant palatial living room where I can clear away the leather sofas and dining table and create a space equivalent to a fucking basketball court in order to play in a relatively safe, injury-free environment. Sadly, I do not have a butler here who can catch me if I fall over while I'm playing. So for me personally, the next Half-Life instalment being a VR game was like spending years trying to get hold of a copy of your favourite discontinued childhood film, only then to discover that the one obscure copy you bought second-hand on eBay turned out to have Filipino audio dubbed over it, with Chinese subtitles hard-baked into the picture, and all the violent gore and killing had been edited out. If you enjoyed Half-Life motion sickness, well, good for you. I, however, have cheaper and more enjoyable methods to experience self-induced nausea and dizziness. And besides, if I wanted to smash my coffee table, I can just fucking smash it myself, without resorting to spending thousands of dollars on VR equipment, so I can fall on it. Thank you very much. HalfLife Alyx. Disqualified. Wasteland III. Made by the video game descendants of the original Wasteland 80s game and Fallout 1 and 2, Wasteland 3 is an isometric top-down, real RPG that excels on all levels. It has great writing, a brilliant soundtrack, and a well-defined and elaborate game world. At the time of reviewing it, I stated it was a Game of the Year contender, and indeed it is. It was modest in scale but delivered in spades. In many ways it carries the torch of the Fallout franchise and legacy, a torch which Bethesda has well and truly dropped. The game also notably managed to take everything enjoyable about old-fashioned turn-based RPGs, remove all the fuckery, and add a load of modern quality of life features so that you feel like you're playing a genuinely modern video game. It's got a great story, a great game world, enjoyable tactical combat, goat sex, genuine deep RPG mechanics, and the outcome of the game is entirely dependent on the choices that you make. This was a simple, well-constructed game where creativity and world building came first. If I have any gripes about this game, it's that I did start to slightly get the suspicion that it was a tiny little bit woke. Not bad woke, I'm talking under the radar, low-key woke. You know, like Outer Worlds woke. You know what I'm talking about. I kind of brushed off the abundance of blue undercut haircuts, the slightly sketchy promotional trailer, and the Reagan bashing in this game, but it kept niggling at me. I guess at the end of the day there is no escaping the fact that in this game the arch narrative is that you are overthrowing the patriarchy. And unfortunately, I mean that very fucking literally. I mean, they literally call the dude the patriarch. You literally have to find a way to overthrow the patriarch, the old white male dude in charge. The white male establishment, if you will. And you get multiple choices of how you do that. He has 3 children and heirs of varying levels of dysfunctionality, a sadistic nutjob and idiot, and a daughter who represents the only workable option as replacement, and only semi-viable candidate. Ultimately, there is an under-the-radar narrative here about overthrowing the patriarchal establishment using force, and the only hereditary option at least is his brutal authoritarian slaver daughter. I'm not going to read too much into it, because you really have to look for this to see it. But the second I googled the topic I realised I was not the only person who saw this. I think Wasteland 3, just like Outer Worlds, is doing a bit of a crafty dance to tickle the woke boxes and try and remain woke enough to appease the triggerati that lurk around Reset Era, whilst not going so woke. They trigger alarm bells within the general gaming community. All this being cogitated, however, Wasteland 3, patriarchy aside, is still, nevertheless, one of the best games I played in 2020. Ghosts of Tsushima. Any game that makes samurai great again, pisses off the People's Republic of China, comes with free added DLC, and is without microtransactional fuckery, gets my vote. Even if it is published by Sony, who seem to have an awful lot in common with the People's Republic of China themselves. They love censoring the internet, they hate free speech, they have a casual disregard of people's rights, they will silence their critics using intimidation and coercion, they believe in using brute force and bullying to crush dissent, they think sexually explicit images are a threat to moral purity. Allegedly. Christ, I think Sony could take over China and nobody would even notice that there had been a change in management. I just hope they don't do all that chemical weapons testing like the last time the Japanese were there. All this being said, Ghosts of Tsushima ended up being the hero of 2020 that Cyberpunk wanted to be. It was notable for being fuckery-free, well-made, polished, enjoyable, and violent. Sure, it was basically a machine made from a bunch of replacement parts taken from other games. The systems and mechanics are well worn, tested and familiar, but it was all repackaged into a very tasteful game, and the swordplay was slick, smooth and bloody. Sucker Punch Productions did fine work here. The video game industry gave all the awards to the horrible, self-indulgent, preachy identity politics monstrosity that was The Last of Us 2. But gamers gave the industry the finger by voting Ghosts of Tsushima as the player choice in 2020. Ghosts of Tsushima epitomises the difference between gamers and the video game industry, and how their agendas are not aligned. And just for giving the Game Awards a slap in the face, it deserves a recommendation. Ghosts of Tsushima is a damn fine game, and if every game released by AAA publishers was this good and this ethical, I would have to start reviewing movies and TV shows instead. And I would probably start with a video about Disney's cowardly sacking of Gina Carano just for standing up for her opinions. Cyberpunk 2077. Well, I think it's safe to say at this point that most gamers are at least aware of this game's existence. Mis-selling, false advertising, shareholder lawsuits, class action lawsuits, the Polish trade authorities threatening prosecution, withdrawn from the Sony boobless censorship store. It basically didn't work on base last-gen consoles at launch. 8 years in the making, but here is the kicker. It now actually turns out that it was 4 years in the making, and the first 4 of the 8-year development period was just bullshit and pipe dreams. This game, and CDPR's executive management, is a house of lies which has run on for nearly a decade. Only a day came when they had to actually let the world see the damn game, and it was weighed, it was measured, and it was found wanting. Personally, I fucking loved Cyberpunk 2077. Sorry about that. I know the rules of the internet demand that thou shalt shit on Cyberpunk 2077, but as a standalone game, I enjoyed it on PC at least. Seriously, despite all its flaws, I played the shit out of it and had a great time. I loved the story, loved the open world, loved the combat, loved Pan Am. It was brilliant. But nobody can deny that 1. It fundamentally was not the game that was promised. 2. It was fairly extensively broke-ass at launch. And 3. Pan Am has a fucking cracking ass. The fundamental issue here is that CDPR basically spent nearly a decade overhyping, overselling and factually bullshitting about this game. And for the first half of that decade, they weren't even doing proper development at all. They were just spinning yarns, telling tales, making up fantasies for the players, and generally talking shit. For the first 4 years of them talking about this game, it didn't exist. The second half of the decade, they weren't even close to finishing it. And at launch, it was neither finished, nor was it the bullshit unicorn of tinsel, dreams and glitter that they had been describing for the last 8 years. I strongly suggest you watch Razorfist's review of Cyberpunk. It's a short video and he does a great job side-by-siding what CDPR has been promising over the years compared to what we actually got in the end. When it's put this brutally, you can really appreciate that CDPR have been lying through their fucking teeth all along. And don't even get me started about the fact that for years they claimed it was going to be a full RPG based on the pen and paper role-playing game, and then just before being released, as an organised act and in completely orchestrated and planned fashion, they changed nearly every reference to the game online from RPG to action-adventure game. I was conflicted about this game because despite all the bugs, glitches, broken mechanics and entirely missing content, it was still the most fun I had gaming in 2020. So absolute respect and credit to the creative artists, designers, musicians, actors and ground level developers that sweated blood and tears to bring us what we actually got. I honestly think that if CDPR spend the next 2 years thrashing the living shit out of this game, patching, finishing and adding content, it could still be a literal masterpiece. I also honestly think that in the light of recent statements from CDPR's executive management, that this may well not happen, because they are probably lying about fixing the game too. For the record, CDPR recently got a stock price bump because Elon Musk was singing the game's praises. I can't fault his taste, but it's worth noting his missus, Grimes, has a cameo in the game playing Wizzy Lizzy and contributed a track to the original soundtrack. So you know, no bias at all. The winner. Well, I guess we should decide which one of these relatively few non-shit 2020 games gets to win the cookie. Ultimately, it has to boil down to a choice between Wasteland 3, Ghosts of Tsushima and Cyberpunk 2077. And this is indeed problematic on many levels. I can't give the prize to Wasteland 3 because as much as I love the damn game, the arch plot is basically kill the patriarchy. Ghosts of Tsushima is universally loved and a great product, but I have to admit, I personally found it a tiny little bit boring and repetitive after a while. Cyberpunk 2077 is without doubt the game I played the most and enjoyed the most in 2020, but I can't reward deception, betrayal and false advertising. So I took the problem to 21Kilotons fucking science lab to see if I could come up with a solution that was fair on the games, fair on the players, and consistent with my own personal fucked up philosophy. And when I was done scribbling on the chalkboard in the lab, I eventually came up with this elegant solution to the equation. Wasteland 3 wins third place because despite being of niche appeal and killing the patriarchy, it's nevertheless a wonderful game. Ghosts of Tsushima wins second place because despite being a bit repetitive and derivative, it's a damn fine game, pro-consumer, and left a smile on a lot of gamers' faces. And first prize goes to Mountain Blade 2 Bannerlord. Because despite not being finished, still being a little bit broke, and having a long way to go, I sank many hundreds of hours into this game. I obsess about building up my little empire of fucklord and fine-tuning my army. It's thoughtful, violent, and it lets you craft your own game experience based on how you want to play. You can be noble, honourable, or just a thieving, murdering bastard. Mountain Blade 2 Bannerlord is a fantastic game, and if you like strategy, playing toy soldiers, and killing, it's money well spent. So Mountain Blade 2 Bannerlord is 21 Kilotons Game of the Year 2020. So I guess this means we have to decide what happens to Cyberpunk 2077. Well, I decided to create a special category just for this game, because on one hand I loved playing it, and on the other hand CDPR's executive management are dirty lying bastards. So since CDPR falsely advertised the game, they abused the fans' money like a Kickstarter fund to bankroll finishing the project, it's not even finished by their own admission, so technically it's early access, and they admitted post-launch in their apology video that it's actually a live service game. But it's still basically a stunning game for 50 quid, primarily because of all the actual people doing work. Not talking and bullshitting, but the actual creative people making the game did such damn fine work against the clock. And these same people deserve some credit. So I came up with my own special award category for Cyberpunk 2077. Cyberpunk 2077 wins Best Kickstarter Early Access Live Service Falsely Advertised Video Game of 2020. Although, since CD Projekt Red, despite making a video game about cyber hacking, had fuck all cybersecurity and ended up getting all their source code hacked and stolen, I guess this award should really read Cyberpunk 2077 wins Best Open Source Kickstarter Early Access Live Service Falsely Advertised Video Game of 2020. Their prize is a copy of the book Pinocchio, and I'm also giving the executive management some protective elbow pads and a particularly uncomfortable and oversized rectal probe. That way, next time they publish a video game and they don't know the difference between their arses and their fucking elbows, at least they will know that their elbows are the things that are not hurting. So in conclusion, yes, 2020 was a fairly shit year for video games overall. I assumed that since the world was on lockdown, publishers would go that extra mile to capitalise on the public's enforced shut-in behaviour and pull out all the stops to lavish extra content on players, even if the lead time was too short to significantly change their development schedules. We also saw a lot of examples of COVID ate my homework. It's now the go-to bullshit excuse for not getting stuff done. I'm not a fucking video game publisher human resources specialist. I've never even covered up a large-scale sexual assault scandal, and I still have a soul. So I'm not an expert here, but if your workforce is 10% less productive due to COVID, hire 10% more staff. Just fix it. You're working for profit, right? COVID ate my homework is bullshit nobody needs to hear, regardless of the fact it's almost universally a lie and people are more productive working from home. But I've heard it from so many publishers this year, with CD Projekt Red and Ubisoft being the most reliant on this bullshit excuse. Besides, nobody wants to hear this shit about working from home. It's a fucking pandemic. Next time you hear a video game publisher griping about the problems of working from home, think about the doctors, nurses, taxi drivers, police officers and delivery guys. They don't get the option to work in the safety of their own home, and they are probably fairly unsympathetic about video game developers griping about having to do Zoom meetings and hide the fucking cat. What if gamers told Ubisoft or CD Projekt Red they want 20% discount on their purchases because COVID ate their job or COVID ate their business? If publishers are going to blame COVID for their fuck-ups, they need to start offering gamers COVID discounts. Going back through the year's releases, I noticed that 2020 was a really stagnant year. It was a year of mostly lazily done remasters of old games, fairly shit AAA titles. Frankly, most of the actual fun I had playing was the result of decent early access or small budget indie games. It's a bit like Hollywood. The video game industry has run out of ideas or the guts to take a gamble on new and daring ideas. And instead, they're relying on rehashing old IP, making sequels, or just digitally remastering old games and releasing them instead. The video game industry is starting to eat itself. I literally got to a point with this video where I thought, can I not think of any other good games to put on this list that aren't Epic Games exclusives, remakes, or in some way problematic? And I couldn't. These were the only good games that came on my radar. From now on, I'm going to put more effort into exploring some of the low budget and indie games being released because frankly, I think that's a better place to find decent games right now. And probably has been for a while, and I just didn't realise. But for now, good luck and happy hunting.